Thank you to the sponsor of this video, Daikin.
I've got a little bit of a treat for you in this video. If you're a pro in our industry, I went to a class about 6 months ago, and it was at HVAC Excellence, which is put on by the ESCO Institute. And I went into this room where I believe the class was something, it was a simple title. It was something like Brazing, right? Brazing the right way or something like that. And so I went into this class, and the guy teaching it, you're about to see, I got time with him and we did an interview. And I'm going to show you some of the clips and things that he showed in that video. But the guy teaching the class, his name is James. He works for Daikin. And James, he's a humble guy. He's a big deal. He's probably laid hands on, if you were to multiply how many you guys and I have seen out in the field of braze joints, multiply that by 1,000 for James, because he's in the factory teaching the folks that do this. He's constantly teaching others, and he's constantly making sure they have best practices and all of that, right? With the equipment itself. And he's just probably seen a bajillion braze joints. Not only is James the teacher and all of that, but James is one of few. Daikin has these tournaments. We're going to do a video on one in the future where they take their best brazing guys and they do a competition, and they do it global. So all the best ones in America, all the best ones in Europe, all the best ones in Asia, they all get together in Japan. They do all these cool things, right? But there's only a few folks globally that they have studied it so much, that they've done it so much, that get a title. I believe it's Takume. So sorry for the pronunciation if I'm not saying it correctly, but it's basically the master of that craft, right? They use that word for martial arts and all kinds of other trades that are out there, right? So James is one of few, and he's the only one in North America that holds that title. And we were able to get time with him to go through one of, I think, the biggest problems. Now, if you're seeing this video and you're a pro, don't click off of this. Don't say, I've been doing this a while and I've brazed before, I already know. No, you need to watch this video. I think every pro in the industry needs to watch this video right here. There were people in that class that I sat in that had been doing this for 40 plus years. They put their hands up and said that. I've been doing this for decades, and I've been teaching others how to do it. And you just showed me that I haven't been showing them the right way, that I have not been brazing the correct way. My mission here, my goal in showing you this video is just to show you the right way. So let's get to that interview with James. When a heating and air system is installed in the field, there's certainly things that could be done wrong electrical wise. There's certainly things that could be done wrong on as far as the drain and things like that. But to me, the thing I see that affects the longevity of the life of the system the most, and that guys do still get wrong today, is brazing that system in.
So yeah, I think the important thing, Josh, when you talk about installing an HVAC system, one of the things is you want to make sure that you have the parts that you're brazing are actually clean. There's a lot of oils and things that could be on the copper tubing when you're trying to braze your line sets, or even from the unit itself. And those oils, and if it could be paint, dirt, grease, just a variety of things, if they've had the copper tubing taped up with some sort of tape to keep moisture and dirt out of it, those things can contaminate the braze joint. And then when you try to braze it, the alloy won't flow and penetrate well. So it's really important, first of all, to make sure that the parts that you're joining have been cleaned. We typically suggest that you use a piece of Scotch-Brite. Sandpaper is not a good option because it does remove the oxide and some of the things off the copper tube, but those particulates from the sandpaper can actually get inside the tubing, and then that creates havoc for the unit as well. What we use a lot is just strictly rubbing alcohol on a rag. Once you clean it with Scotch-Brite, you can get some rubbing alcohol on a rag and wipe the tubes off to remove any dust or anything that's there. But I can't express enough how crucial it is to make sure that you've actually cleaned the parts and cleaned them well. The second thing I would say is making sure that the clearances of your parts are correct. Even in our factory, we don't measure these parts every single time before we braze with a set of calipers or micrometers. But a good rule of thumb is I should be able to insert the inner pipe and the expansion. I should be able to insert those fully and completely with ease. Oftentimes we say you could be able to rotate those parts, but often in a line set, it's not possible to do that. Well, what I've seen, the mistakes I've seen from the field oftentimes is that the expansions are just way too big. There's way too much clearance. There's a lot of risk in that. It makes it more difficult to braze, especially in the horizontal position. But also, if you're brazing a downward braze joint, vertical down joint, you can actually get alloy that bypasses the bottom of the joint and can clog or partially clog the ID of the tube. And then that creates problems for the unit as well. So making sure that you have the proper clearances, it's about 1.5 thousandths. Imagine a sheet of paper, trying to put a thin sheet of paper between those two parts you're trying to braze, and it doesn't fit. So it's about like pulling a hair from your head. That's the clearance you're looking for. The third thing I would say is the overlap of the joint area is also critical to good brazing and having braze joints that are going to last and give you longevity. And what I mean by overlap is the insertion distance of one tube inside the other. What I saw from the field joint repairs that we got back and did the evaluations on was that if there was a sufficient expansion on the tube, expansion depth, the tubes were only partially inserted. So you can imagine that this also can create problems where the alloy gets inside there and clogs the tube, but the joint strength is dependent upon having those tubes fully inserted, but also making sure you have the right overlap area. Some people are referred to it similar to digging a post hole, and the deeper you go with that hole into the ground, the easier it is to keep that pole upright in that hole. If it's very shallow, it falls over, right? And that's similar to brazing. But the more overlap area you have, the stronger the joint will be once you're finished brazing. For field joint connections, what we typically say is if it's a 7/8 OD tube, then you'd like to be able to retain a 7/8 depth or insertion of the inner pipe, and so forth. If it's 3/8, then obviously you don't need 7/8 of an inch, insertion. About 3/8 of an inch is normally sufficient for a line set. But that's just a general rule of thumb for how much insertion depth you should have. The biggest mistake that I see most brazers make, and I think even as trainers, oftentimes we struggle with this. Struggle to believe in it, struggle to really think that it's crucial or important to get consistent brazing. 80% of the work when you're brazing, once you've done your prep work, 80% of the work is actually the preheating. I know we did some videos once where we showed a braze joint that was preheated properly and the alloy flowed in. And then we did one where preheating didn't occur and they tried to just braze and patch the alloy just to make a fillet and cap it off. And there was only like 2 seconds difference between the two videos. People think it's going to take me too much time if I preheat the parts, and so they just don't preheat. And oftentimes in the field, a lot of contractors are trained that if you see any color in the copper tube, then you've overheated it. You've done the wrong thing. But it's right the opposite of that. You really want to heat till it's kind of a dull cherry red color. And like I said, if your parts are clean, the clearances are good, you've inserted your parts correctly. If you take the time to preheat and preheat well, and what I mean by well is, one is you're looking for the color, that dark cherry red to light red color, but also is to make sure that the inner pipe, the outer pipe, and the entire circumference has been heated evenly and uniformly. That is the most crucial part of brazing. In our factories, it's the same, but also even in the field installations, having the process where you make sure that every time you see some color in your parts before you apply the alloy.
Let's take a moment from the interview. Now, I've got a few more cool things to show you from the interview in just a moment, but I want to take a moment to show you two people brazing, one doing it the wrong way and one doing it the right way. And the main thing we want to show here is there's methods of doing this, and there's the way a lot of guys do it in our trade. In fact, some of the guys I learned from, the way they do it, and then there's the right way to do it, and showing that it doesn't take that much more time. We're going to see it timed as they record this, and you'll see it doesn't take that much longer to do it the right way. You had said something that I think does conflict with some of the videos I've seen out there, and that is when you set your torch. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you had said you're going for a neutral flame. Is that right?
That is correct, Josh. And I think everybody typically that I see normally, they err on the side of having a carburizing flame, which is too much gas and not enough oxygen. So then the flame's very cold. And then the preheating or the effort to preheat the parts just takes forever, right? And then you see the part where they err on the other side where it's an oxidizing flame with way too much oxygen. And that makes the flame extremely hot. And even then, it adds time to the brazing because everybody's always afraid I'm going to burn the copper tube. But having those balanced levels of gas and oxygen, that neutral flame, it really depends on the hole that's in the end of the tip you're using as to how long that inner flame should be. But you want the flame to be the inner flame to be excessively long or excessively short. And listen to the sound of the torch. When you're running an oxidizing flame, it's going to be very noisy. And not having much experience, not having much training in the field, running an oxidizing flame runs the risk of actually burning the tube. And I think I had a couple samples came back to me where the outer tube had actually been burnt a little bit, and they just capped it over with alloy. And that, again, is a terrible practice to do. Lots of risk of that joint coming apart in the field if that happens.
I know one thing you touched on in the class was brazing rods themselves and whether or not it matters how much silver's in that rod.
The more silver content you have in the alloy, it is a little bit stronger, but at the same time, 15% alloy is extremely expensive. Yeah. And I think it's an expense that contractors are eating that is unnecessary. And I say that because we did a class up in Washington State once where there was 8 contractors, and we asked them, hey, what kind of alloy do you guys use on the field? And they all said we use 15%. Okay, well, that's great. And we did the training, we did the theory training with them, and then we had them to start brazing. And we didn't tell them which alloy we brought for the training, and they didn't ask. They brazed the entire week with a 0% silver alloy.
Wow.
I think most people recommend at least 5% for the field connections. And I would probably say 5% is a better choice for that. But we had them braze all week long with 0%. All they'd ever used before was 15. At the very end of the week, we slipped a piece of 15% alloy into their mix, and they used that. And they never said anything, oh, this worked better, or this worked, a lot better than what we've been using all week. They didn't even notice. And so what we said to them after the class was almost finished was, hey, are you guys aware that you've been brazing all week long with 0% alloy? They said, no, we thought we were using 15%. I said, no, you've been using 0% for the entire time.
Wow.
And I asked them, was your braze joints coming out good? Was the penetration good? We've been cutting these parts and letting you evaluate the inside, the outside, and how were your parts with a 0%? And they said, well, they were perfect. And to me, using 15% is a lot of extra cost to the contractor, and it doesn't really yield you anything, in my opinion.
Well, let's talk about the big thing, and that is flowing nitrogen when brazing. I think that it's more common now than it used to be, but it's absolutely paramount, and there's still plenty of guys not doing it.
Yeah, Josh, going back to the samples that we brought back from the field, some of the parts they had burst tests before we got them. So they'd had water, inside the tubes and done a burst test before I got them. But most of the parts that I got back had lots of oxidation on the inside of the tube. And that really tells me that there was no nitrogen used when these units were installed. You really need nitrogen flowing through the tube the entire time that you're brazing. Sometimes you have a sealed system where you can't really have it flowing all the time, but if you at least purge the system and then immediately go in and braze it, normally you're okay. But it's really the best practice is to have nitrogen flowing the entire time you're brazing. And depending on the size of the tube, even sometimes after you finish the brazing, let the nitrogen continue to flow just for a few minutes to make sure that no oxidation forms as the tubes are cooling down.
Oh, interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah, we see in some of our factories where we have maybe a 2-inch pipe that we're actually brazing, that if we only use the nitrogen just while we're brazing and immediately shut it off, that oxidation will form as the parts are cooling because they're still extremely hot.
That makes sense. I never thought of that. That's interesting.
But when the oxidation, forms inside these tubes, and it will form when you're heating the copper tube, that gets inside the system. Then the refrigerants are almost like a cleansing agent, and when they start flowing through that tubing, the oxidation sometimes even is flaky. It will come off the copper tube, get circulated through your system, and filter dryers, very small capillary tubes can be completely clogged with this oxidation. It gets in your compressor bearing, shortens the life of the compressor. So just a lot of things that, the oxidation can cause a lot of problems for the contractor, for the homeowner, especially if one of the circuits gets completely clogged, one of those small capillary tubes gets clogged up. The refrigerant won't flow through that circuit in the system. And I think, quite honestly, the homeowner is going to be disappointed, and his house is not going to be cool. So it's extremely important to use the nitrogen, dry nitrogen, when you're actually brazing, and it's best to use it the entire time.
So that's it as far as brazing goes. Thank you to James for taking time out to hang out with me and show how to do things the right way. We're going to do more videos like this in the future. If you're not subscribed, make sure you do that. If you like this video, I think you'll like this one even more. It's where I go over a board that you should be installing with every A2L install that's a mismatch. Thanks for watching. Hit that subscribe button for more HVAC tips. We'll see you next time.